There is a strip of water in the Persian Gulf that is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. 21 miles. You could see the other side on a clear day. Through that strip of water passes approximately 20% of the world's entire supply of petroleum and 20% of its liquefied natural gas, every single day. Tankers carrying the energy that heats homes in Europe, powers factories in China, fuels cars in the United States, and keeps the lights on across Japan, South Korea, India, and virtually every other industrial economy on Earth. That strip of water is the Strait of Hormuz, and as of March 4th, 2026, Iran has declared it closed.
Not threatened to close it, not warned about closing it, closed it, with Iranian Revolutionary Guard forces attacking ships attempting to transit, driving a 95% reduction in crude oil tanker traffic and a 99% reduction in LNG shipments, according to World Trade Organization data. The UAE's state-owned oil company has already estimated that even if a deal is reached quickly, full flows through the strait will not resume until 2027. What you are watching right now is not simply a military confrontation between the United States and Iran. What you are watching is a choke point crisis, an attack on the physical infrastructure of the global economy itself, of a kind that the post-war international order has never fully experienced before. I'm Richard Hale, and in this video, I am going to show you exactly why the Strait of Hormuz is irreplaceable, what closing it actually means for global energy markets and economic stability, how we arrived at this moment, what each actor in this confrontation actually wants and fears, and what the realistic scenarios for how this ends look like, and what they mean for every country on Earth. If you are new to this channel, subscribe and turn on notifications now. This is precisely the kind of analysis you will find here. Let me start with the geography, because understanding the Strait of Hormuz begins with understanding why it cannot simply be bypassed. Why, unlike almost every other geopolitical choke point in the world, closing it produces consequences that cannot be routed around. The Strait of Hormuz sits at the mouth of the Persian Gulf, the narrow passage connecting the Gulf to the Gulf of Oman, and from there to the Indian Ocean and the world. Open shipping lanes. To the north lies Iran, to the south lies Oman. The navigable shipping channels, 2 lanes, each 2 miles wide, one inbound and one outbound, run through waters that are simultaneously Iranian and Omani territorial waters at their narrowest point. This geography matters enormously because the Persian Gulf is not just a body of water that happens to have oil beneath it, it is the location of the single largest concentration of proven oil and gas reserves on Earth. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain. Combined, these nations hold approximately 48% of the world's proven oil reserves and the world's largest proven reserves of natural gas. All of it sits behind the Strait of Hormuz. All of it requires passing through those 2-mile-wide navigable channels to reach the global market. Before the current crisis, approximately 21 million barrels of oil passed through the strait every single day. That is roughly 1 in 5 barrels of oil consumed anywhere on Earth. For context, the entire daily oil production of the United States, the world's largest oil producer, is approximately 13 million barrels per day. The Strait of Hormuz carries more oil daily than the United States produces. There is no geographic feature on Earth more strategically critical to the functioning of the global energy system. Now, the critical question: can it be bypassed? The honest answer is partially, slowly, expensively, and not nearly enough to compensate for what is currently being blocked. There are 2 alternative pipelines that allow some Persian Gulf oil to reach markets without transiting the strait. The first is the East-West pipeline in Saudi Arabia, which runs from the Gulf Coast to the Red Sea port of Yanbu with a capacity of approximately 5 million barrels per day. The second is the Habshan-Fujairah pipeline in the UAE, which runs to the port of Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman with a capacity of approximately 1.5 million barrels per day.
Combined, these two pipelines can move approximately 6.5 million barrels per day around the strait, roughly 30% of the pre-crisis strait traffic volume. They cannot be expanded quickly. They were built over years and at enormous cost. And they leave approximately 14 to 15 million barrels per day with no alternative route. Oh, market. That gap, 14 to 15 million barrels per day of oil that simply cannot reach global markets as long as the strait remains effectively closed, is the source of every economic consequence that follows. And those consequences are already cascading. If you are finding this analysis useful, and what I'm about to show you about who actually benefits from this crisis is not what most coverage is telling you, hit that like button and subscribe if you have not already. Getting this analysis to people who need it depends on your support. Now let me show you how we arrived at this moment, because understanding the current crisis requires understanding the strategic logic that produced it, on all sides. The strikes of February 28, 2026, designated Operation Epic Fury by the United States military, were the culmination of a strategic calculation that had been building in Washington and Tel Aviv for years. The stated objectives were threefold: to destroy Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile program, to eliminate the leadership structure of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and to create the conditions for regime change in Tehran. The assassination of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei in the opening hours of the operation was the most dramatic and consequential element. It was also, in the assessment of most serious analysts, the decision that made the Strait of Hormuz closure both inevitable and strategically logical from Iran's perspective.
Here is why.
Khamenei's death did not produce the regime collapse that Washington and Tel Aviv appeared to have anticipated. His son was rapidly installed as successor. The Revolutionary Guard, which controls Iran's missile forces, its naval assets in the Persian Gulf, and its proxy network across the region, remained intact and operationally coherent. And the new Iranian leadership faced an immediate and existential strategic calculation. If Iran responded to the strikes in kind, missile for missile, target for target, it would simply absorb more punishment from military forces it cannot match in conventional terms. The alternative, the response that Iran chose, was to attack not the military assets of its adversaries, but the economic foundation on which those adversaries and the entire global system depend.
Close the strait. Make the cost of the war felt not just by American and Israeli military planners, but by every government and every citizen on Earth who depends on Persian Gulf energy. This is not a new strategic concept. Iran has explicitly threatened strait closure for decades. It has conducted military exercises specifically designed to demonstrate its ability to do so. The IRGC's naval capabilities in the Persian Gulf, fast attack craft, anti-ship missiles, naval mines, submarine assets, shore-based missile batteries have been systematically developed over 30 years with the specific purpose of making the strait a tool of strategic leverage in precisely this kind of confrontation. What changed in February 2026 was that the threshold for exercising that leverage was finally crossed. The assassination of the supreme leader, the elimination of the head of the Islamic Republic itself, was an act of war of a magnitude that left Iran with no strategic alternative but to respond with its most powerful asymmetric tool. The strait closure is not an act of desperation. It is the execution of a strategy that Iran has been preparing for decades. Now, I want to show you something that almost every Western media outlet is missing in its coverage of this crisis, something that fundamentally changes how you understand who has leverage, who is under pressure, and who is actually winning the strategic competition that is unfolding beneath the military confrontation. The Strait of Hormuz closure does not hurt all countries equally. It does not even hurt the United States most severely. And the countries that benefit from this crisis are not the ones most Western audiences would expect. Let us start with Russia. Russia is the world's second largest oil producer and the world's largest exporter of natural gas. Russia does not send its oil through the Strait of Hormuz. Its export infrastructure, pipelines running west to Europe, east to China, and tanker routes through the Baltic and Black Seas, is entirely independent of the Persian Gulf choke point.
What the strait closure has done for Russia is to remove approximately 20% of global oil supply from the market, which has driven oil prices sharply upward. Every additional dollar on the price of a barrel of oil is additional revenue for the Russian state. At a time when Russia is fighting a war in Ukraine and its economy is under Western sanctions pressure, a sustained strait crisis generating significantly elevated global oil prices is a strategic windfall of extraordinary proportions. Russia had no involvement in the military conflict that produced the strait closure. It bears none of the reputational, diplomatic, or economic costs of the US-Iran war, and it is receiving the energy revenue benefits of the crisis automatically and continuously. This is what strategists call a free rider position, and it is one of the most significant strategic asymmetries in the current situation. China's position is more complex and more interesting. China is the world's largest oil importer. Approximately 40% of China's oil imports transit the Strait of Hormuz. In the immediate term, the strait closure is therefore genuinely painful for China. It increases Chinese energy costs and places pressure on an economy that is already navigating significant structural challenges. But the medium and longer-term strategic picture for China is considerably more favorable. First, China has been quietly securing alternative supply arrangements. Its energy partnership with Russia, already dramatically expanded since 2022, provides a significant non-strait energy supply channel. Chinese tankers have been among the vessels Iran has designated as permitted to transit the strait, as Beijing has maintained its relationship with Tehran throughout the US-Iran confrontation. Second, and more importantly, the US-Iran war has accelerated every trend that China's long-term strategic competition with the United States requires. It has overextended American military and diplomatic resources. It has driven a wedge between the United States and the Gulf Arab states, who are furious at the disruption to their own energy revenues and at not being adequately consulted before the strikes. It has damaged American credibility as a security guarantor in the region, and it has made every country in the global South more acutely aware of what dependence on American-dominated trade infrastructure actually means, accelerating the very de-dollarization and parallel infrastructure building that China has been promoting for years. The Gulf Arab states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, are in perhaps the most painful position of any actor in this crisis. Their oil, which represents the overwhelming majority of their government revenue, cannot reach global markets. The strikes that created this situation were conducted without their explicit endorsement, and they now find themselves simultaneously dependent on American military protection and economically devastated by American military action. Saudi Arabia's relationship with the United States is at its most strained since the aftermath of September 11th. The kingdom is in active dialogue with China and Russia about alternative security arrangements. The Abraham Accords normalization process with Israel, which had been the central pillar of American Middle East strategy, is effectively suspended. And the Saudi leadership is drawing conclusions about American reliability as a security partner that will shape the kingdom's strategic posture for a generation. This is the dimension of the strait crisis that most North American commentary is not adequately addressing. The military confrontation between the United States and Iran is visible and dramatic. The quiet realignment of the Gulf Arab states, the most consequential shift in Middle Eastern geopolitics since the 1973 oil embargo, is happening in the background, and its implications are far more durable than whatever military outcome eventually emerges from the current conflict. Now, let me give you the scenarios for how this ends, because this is the question that every government, every energy market, and every strategic planner in the world is currently trying to answer. Scenario 1. Negotiated reopening within weeks. A ceasefire framework is extended and a diplomatic channel, potentially brokered by Oman, which shares territorial waters over the strait and has historically served as a back channel between Washington and Tehran, produces a negotiated arrangement under which Iran conditionally reopens the strait in exchange for a halt to US and Israeli strikes and the beginning of talks on Iran's nuclear status and the future political structure of the Islamic Republic. This scenario is possible. The ceasefire extensions that have already occurred suggest some channel of communication exists. But it requires Washington to accept that regime change, the stated objective of Operation Epic Fury, is not achievable through military means alone, and that a negotiated outcome with whatever Iranian leadership currently exists is preferable to indefinite strait.
Closure. The Trump administration's public statements, threatening to take total control of Iran's oil industry, suggest this accommodation is not currently on the table. This scenario's probability is meaningful but not dominant. Scenario 2. U.S. military forces the strait open. The United States deploys sufficient naval and air power to escort tankers through the strait against Iranian interdiction, effectively fighting its way through the choke point. This is theoretically possible. The U.S. Navy has the assets and capability to degrade Iranian anti-ship missile batteries and provide escort for commercial traffic. But the Brookings Institution's analysis of U.S. naval power in this conflict has already identified a significant problem. Iranian anti-ship capabilities, missiles, mines, fast attack craft, are designed specifically for the enclosed waters of the Persian Gulf, where American naval advantages in open ocean warfare are substantially reduced. Forcing the strait open militarily would require sustained combat operations in Iranian territorial waters, significant risk to U.S. naval assets, and an escalation that could bring Iranian missile strikes on Gulf Arab oil infrastructure to a scale that damages the very energy flows the operation is designed to restore. The partial reopening of the strait to some traffic under U.S. naval escort is ongoing. Full commercial restoration through military force alone remains significantly more difficult than initial commentary suggested. Scenario 3. Extended closure with global economic restructuring. The conflict settles into a prolonged stalemate, neither side achieving its objectives, neither side willing to make the concessions required for a negotiated settlement. The strait remains partially or largely closed for an extended period. Global energy markets restructure around the reality of Persian Gulf inaccessibility. Alternative supply sources, American shale, North Sea, West African, and other producers, ramp up production to partially compensate. Energy prices remain elevated for a sustained period, driving inflation, economic slowdown, and political disruption across the globe. This is the scenario that the UAE's oil company estimate. Full flows not resuming until 2027, even with a quick deal, is pointing toward. It is also the scenario that benefits Russia most completely, that accelerates the Gulf Arab strategic realignment away from the United States most decisively, and that produces the most durable damage to American strategic credibility in the region and globally. It is, as of this analysis, also the most likely scenario, not because anyone chose it, but because the gap between what each side requires to exit the conflict and what each side is currently willing to offer is too wide to be bridged quickly, and because the military and political dynamics are pushing toward prolongation rather than rapid resolution. Let me close with what this means for the ordinary person watching this video. Energy prices have already risen sharply and will remain elevated for as long as the strait remains effectively closed. That means higher prices at the pump, higher heating costs, higher costs for everything that is manufactured, transported, or packaged using energy, which is to say, everything. The inflationary impact of a sustained strait crisis will work its way through every economy connected to global trade, which is every economy on Earth. The geopolitical consequences are more durable and more important. The U.S.-Iran war has produced a strategic environment in which American military dominance in the Middle East, the foundation of the post-1973 energy security architecture, has been demonstrated to have real and significant limits. The ability of a mid-sized regional power, equipped with the right asymmetric tools and willing to accept the costs, to impose global economic pain on the world's largest military power is a lesson that every government on Earth is absorbing right now. 21 miles of water. That is all it took. The world that existed on February 27, 2026, before the first American bombs fell on Iranian territory, is not the world we are living in now. And the world that emerges from this crisis, however it is eventually resolved,
will carry the strategic consequences of these weeks for decades. Understanding those consequences clearly is the difference between being shaped by events and understanding them.
If this analysis changed the way you see the Strait of Hormuz story, share it with someone who is still reading the headlines. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next piece of this picture. And tell me in the comments, which scenario for how this ends do you think is most likely, and what should Washington be doing that it currently is not? I'm Richard Hale, and I will see you in the next analysis.